So welcome back to the Free Mouse MC, and the Scrambler craze is in full swing. So many different offers for this kind of motorcycle on the market, and today we're going to have a look at two examples that are surprisingly close to each other: the Triumph Scrambler 900 and the Royal Enfield Bear 650, a comparison that so many people of you asked for. So here we go. The Triumph Scrambler 900's power comes in at 64 horsepower and 80 Newton meters of torque, while the Bear 650 comes in at a 46 horsepower and 56 Newton meters of torque. The Bear 650 also comes in at a 214 kilos with 130 millimeters of suspension travel in the front and 115 in the rear, while the Triumph Scrambler 900 comes in at 223 kilos and 120 millimeters of suspension travel in the front and back. So if you only look at the numbers and see what numbers are better, the Triumph Scrambler 900 is definitely ahead. Apart from the suspension travel, the bike being in general a bit smaller doesn't make that much of a difference, and the suspension actually works pretty well, I have to say. So with the Triumph Scrambler 900 already pulling ahead when it comes to the specs, let's see what kind of money does this performance cost you. With the Triumph Scrambler 900, it will cost you $11,400 on average, depending on what country and what colorway, which is quite a bit of money. In contrast to that, the Bear 650 definitely wins this, because that bike starts here in my home country Germany at 7,690 euros. So with the Royal Enfield Bear 650 being able to close the gap to the Triumph Scrambler 900 when it comes to the price, let's have a look at the other things, because motorcycles are more than their specs and price tag. So let's have a look at the riding character, in specific the engine, because when it comes to the character of the engine, the Royal Enfield Bear 650 is quite a lot of fun. In relation to the price tag, that works fine. The 648cc air and oil cooled engine is pretty nice, with also the 270-degree crank. However, I have to say, because the thing is, an engine is not always just an engine, but also the transmission. And the engine combined with the transmission feels a lot nicer on the Triumph, because you have this 5-gear transmission that is basically a 4-gear transmission, and the 5th gear is an overdrive, which really helps this like vintage bike feel, and it feels really good. And also the torque on that motorcycle is quite a lot, and also it comes on so much at the bottom. Like, you can just out of the low RPMs accelerate out of it, and that feels really satisfying and good on the Triumph Scrambler 900. And also the low down grunt is really nice when riding the bike off the beaten path, because I off-roaded the Bear 650, for example, in comparison quite a lot with together with people on Himalayan 450s, which also has really low torque. And I genuinely struggled to keep up without giving a lot of gas, simply because of how the torque comes on in the rev range. So when it comes to engine character, the Triumph Scrambler 900 definitely gets its second point. Let's talk about the riding position and day-to-day riding, how it is off the beaten path. We will get to in a second as well. And here, both bikes honestly don't really shine, because yes, the Bear 650 has a really wide stance, which feels really cool when swinging your leg over the bike. However, the foot pegs and the way that space is made for the exhaust lead to a crooked position of your feet on the foot pegs, and the shift lever feels a bit off. That's not so nice. And you could now say, oh, easy point for the Triumph. No, sadly not either, because the way you sit on the Triumph Scrambler 900 is comfortable and everything, but your legs are so close together under the engine that the feeling of, oh yeah, I ride a proper motorcycle, and like, you know, this special motorcycle feeling that feels intense and strong and so on, gets lost quite a lot in the body position. So I'll have to make this one a draw at the end of the day. So as you heard, I'm a bit critical of your legs being so close together on the Triumph Scrambler 900, and it does make me feel like the feel of the motorcycle. Let's talk about the feel that these motorcycles have in day-to-day riding. And here the Bear definitely gets a point, because the Bear, when you swing a leg over it, the engine feels really wide, and it has that hog feel of a motorcycle basically, and I really like that. And even though it's a Scrambler, the handlebars are kind of like you're lean forward on the motorcycle when riding it, and at the same time they're still pretty wide, which has its drawbacks off-road, definitely. However, it feels like you are like leaning wildly off the motorcycle in a turn, which feels really satisfying, and in that way the bike feels pretty good to ride and you feel like you're the guy when being on the bike. So in that way the Bear definitely gets that point. With the Royal Enfield Bear 650, with that closing the gap and the two bikes being on the same level, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this video, which is the off-road rideability of these motorcycles. And I have to disappoint you here instantly. Both of these motorcycles are more dressed up off-roaders than actual off-roaders. That was also already apparent when talking about the specs and the suspension travel, with both of them not being too impressive. However, I have to say that the suspension feels a bit better on the Triumph Scrambler 900 because it just, I don't know, the way that the suspension feels, it feels like it has more suspension travel than it actually does. Apart from that, those bikes are pretty equal in off-road rideability. However, I still have to give the point to the Triumph Scrambler 900 because it from the factory comes with a lot of things that the Bear just doesn't. From factory, the Bear doesn't have a bash plate. You can get that as an extra, but it doesn't have it. It has a handlebar that is weirdly lean forward that results in you feeling that you're going over the handlebars every time you shift down while standing up, and when getting onto bigger drops could feel a bit sketchy. And just the general fun feeling of the motorcycle off-road on the Triumph Scrambler 900 is a lot bigger. Like, you're enjoying your time a lot more. Also, a point that definitely wins the Triumph Scrambler 900, the off-road rideability point, is the really beautiful upswept exhaust that first of all doesn't get in the way when off-roading, and also just looks really, really gorgeous and is a unique selling point for that motorcycle in my opinion. It's definitely a close comparison between the two, with the Triumph Scrambler currently standing at 4 points and the Royal Enfield Bear 650 at 3 points. Let's get to another point where the Royal Enfield Bear 650 will catch up, and that is the general size of the motorcycle. The Triumph Scrambler 900 is surprisingly small. You see it on pictures and you're like, oh wow, this is a decent sized motorcycle, and then you stand in front of it and you realize, damn, everyone can sit on this, and this is quite, I don't want to say cute in its size, but I don't look good on the bike, truth be told. Like, I'm a tall guy. When I sit on the motorcycle, it looks off. A bit, I have that problem too with the Bear 650. However, it's a bigger bike, and the bigger the bike, the more I like it. And it's also there an improvement over the Interceptor because of the more suspension travel and the bigger wheels. So in that regard, I will definitely give the point to the Royal Enfield Bear 650. However, if you're a smaller individual and you don't manage to work that well with the seat height, which I think is 820 millimeters, if I don't need to correct myself, then of course you can rearrange these points for yourself, with the Triumph Scrambler 900 coming in with a seat height of I think 780 millimeters. With both of these motorcycles being retro-inspired motorcycles, which bike does the immersion better? Where do you feel more like a cool dude sitting on a motorcycle from the 1960s? And I definitely have to give Triumph here the point, because the Triumph feels better here already from its riding character with the 5-speed transmission. And also the bike has an analog gauge, which looks really nice. It's nicely in the center, and an analog gauge is a contact point with the motorcycle that reminds you very regularly on what kind of bike you're actually sitting on. If you compare that to the Bear 650, which with it having a digital dash, basically you will look down at that every few seconds, and without thinking about it, you will realize you sit on a modern motorcycle. And also just the whole feel of how the handlebars feel. The handlebars on the Triumph are a bit thinner, and I think thinner handlebars always lead to a more retro feel, because old bikes just used to have these really, really thin bars at the end of the day, and that feel is here a lot closer with the Triumph. However, I have to say both of them break the immersion with their blinkers. Both of them have modern blinkers, and they basically are the same there, and both of them could have done better there, definitely. Talking about the blinkers, let's talk about the looks overall, and that point will also go to the Triumph, and here the visual selling point is definitely the exhaust. The bikes look pretty similar. Honestly, the colorways of the Royal Enfield Bear are cooler, but compared, like the exhaust is such a standout feature of the Triumph Scrambler 900, and it's so special about the bike, and it looks so nice that that point has to go to the Triumph at the end of the day. Let's talk about reliability. And in that case, the Bear is making another point, because the Bear is definitely getting that one. The bike is powered by the 648cc engine, and it's an incredibly reliable engine. I used to work in a Royal Enfield dealership, and we had contacts to people from India who rode that bike there, and one of my mechanic friends has a friend in India who has ridden his Interceptor with the same engine over 300,000 kilometers. That's car numbers. That's insane. And the simplicity of the engine, you're able to adjust your own valves. This is great. Compared to the engine in the Triumph, which also has modern day reliability. Also, the European brands build reliable motorcycles today. Short note from the edit table: the Triumph Scrambler 900 that I tested for this video had a problem of leaking coolant from the head casting. In all fairness, it also has to be admitted that Royal Enfield has some struggles with quality control, which can lead to some gears turning into a false neutral, like the third gear, especially on the 21 and 22 year models with the 650 engine. However, I've never ran into this problem myself, and I had a really good experience with the Royal Enfield 650 engine. Because of my overall satisfaction with the engine and the simplicity, I still gave the Bear the point. So it's now standing 5-4 for the Triumph Scrambler 900. Will the Bear 650 be able to make this a draw at the end of the day? Let's get to the next category, and that is build quality. And sadly, I will have to give this to Triumph, because yes, I now didn't see these two motorcycles over a really long time, but if you look at the different bikes of the brand in specific, you notice that Triumph is better at that. And that is because Royal Enfield builds bikes for the Indian market, and they're meant to succeed in the Indian market. The Indian market doesn't have salt on the streets in winter. It doesn't have shitty weather basically for more than half the year, like here in Europe and in England. And Triumph, with it being a European-focused brand, manages that stuff a lot better. I have a friend who drives a Bonneville, and he lives in the Bay of Dublin, like Bay of Dublin as in there's the sea outside of his garage, like instantly. And I remember seeing him, and his bike looks good. And I asked him, like, what are you using? Are you using Autosol? And he didn't know what Autosol was. He was only washing his bike with water, and he managed to get away with that. With a Royal Enfield, you're not getting away with that. I have a Royal Enfield standing right here, and I already need to polish the chrome again. And I've been having this bike for 2 weeks. So that is definitely a topic. And yes, the bikes don't have a lot of chrome parts, but this also goes to other parts. I rubbed through the paint of my Royal Enfield Interceptor through with my jeans. It took 16,000 kilometers, but it happened. And I think Triumph at the end of the day, for that price point, manages a bike that doesn't age as quick. So I'll definitely have to give that point to Triumph. Also because the Triumph Scrambler 900 comes with tubeless tires and spoked rims. With it being a Scrambler, that's definitely a plus. So I have to conclude, the Triumph Scrambler 900 beats the Royal Enfield Bear 650. However, usually on the motorcycle market, the purchasing price of a motorcycle is kind of in no relation to the quality of the motorcycle. That's something that I realize really often when reviewing bikes. However, that's here the case, because you pay multiple thousands of euros more for that machine, and you get a lot more stuff. You get a beautiful exhaust, you get a badge plate from factory, you get better build quality, you get tubeless tires with spoked rims in combination, you get a more characterful engine. All of these things, that is basically the additional cost of the Triumph Scrambler 900. I think the actual real comparison comes in if like you start looking for a Triumph Scrambler 900 at the used market with like 20 to 30,000 kilometers on the clock, because all of a sudden it's the same price as the Bear, and you just need to live with it having a few more kilometers on the clock, which I think is fine, and the bike will definitely be able to manage. So at the end of the day, it's your decision. I now laid all the information that I have here for you, and definitely check out the different reviews to that bike, and potentially also the review of the Triumph Scrambler 1200. So see you in the next video, and thanks for watching.